Today on the Work of Health podcast, I am talking to Jeannine Coulter, host of the Chasing Heroine podcast, fitness professional, content creator, and of course, a person in recovery first and foremost. Jeannine and I have known each other for a few years, but we'd never really sat down, and I've never really heard her story quite like this. We talk about those moments from active addiction that are burned into our memory, the kind of slow and sometimes almost invisible way our standards change as addiction progresses. And we even talk about the attempts at recovery that don't stick, but they're not failures. Jeannine is funny, she's incredibly candid, and she's got this quintessential West Coast vibe that always cheers up this grumpy New Yorker. I'm Max. This is the Work of Health podcast. Here's my conversation with Jeannine Coulter.
My name is Jeannine Coulter, and I'm the host of the Chasing Heroine podcast, which is an addiction recovery podcast that I started in 2020 while my studio was sort of on hiatus during COVID because I'm also in fitness. I still work in fitness as sort of my day job in quotes. And I'm also a social media content creator, primarily with sobriety and recovery content, a little bit of fitness also. So podcast host, fitness professional, content creator, person in recovery.
Number one right there, absolutely, which probably brought all of those wonderful things to you in some ways, right?
Yes. The fitness I already did, but it got much better, obviously, when I was no longer doing cocaine or shooting heroin. I became a much better spin teacher when I wasn't on meth and heroin. So, but the podcast and the social media stuff definitely as a direct result of recovery.
And you and I, like we were saying before, we've known each other for almost 3 years, worked in the kind of same circles. I know a little bit of your story from us talking. I've gathered a little bit more from your own podcast, but kind of in your own words, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to where you were in active addiction and what was going on in your life and just everything about it, if you could take us back.
Sure. So, and the question that you had asked that I loved is, was there one day that would really describe, sum up, or make clear where you were at? And I love that question too, because 2 days immediately popped into my mind. So in an addiction that spanned 15 years, the first 10 years are what I would call manageable almost. I mean, if you were in my life, manageable was debatable, but I wasn't homeless, right? I was drinking a lot. I did a lot of cocaine. But I got certified to teach spin at that time. And wasn't homeless. I was employed. I was able to keep jobs for, year and a half or so at that time. The last 5 years were really bad. I was homeless and strung out on meth and heroin for 5 years. I got arrested 4 times, from a DUI through strong arm robbery was my last arrest, was my last charge. I was facing a strike in California and prison time. And so the last 5 years were really gnarly. And the day that popped up to me when I read that question was, so I had been homeless for a few months, and the guy that I was running around with at that time, who I did all my using with, we were together for a few years. We had broken into this mansion on the beach in Oceanside, and it was a literal beach mansion, but it was being torn down, which I didn't know what was going on with it, but it clearly had been abandoned. And there was a big orange sticker on the front on the garage. And I was too close to the road, and I was on a lot of meth. And I was like, I'm not looking at that sign. But I had a feeling it said like condemned or something. And months later, when I was in rehab, we drove by it and it had been torn down. So obviously that's what it said. But it also had a for sale sign in the front. And so I was paranoid that one day some realtor was going to walk in, and we had broken into this place and all of the fixtures were ripped out, no toilets, just holes in the floor that we would use to go to the bathroom. We would throw needles into the fireplace, the empty fireplace, no lighting, obviously, no electricity, no plumbing, newspapers on the windows. I mean, full on trap house, but a group of mansions that were all kind of clustered close to each other. And we would stay in there at night, and I would go back and forth from the front room, which was like upstairs right by the highway, to more towards the back, which was on the sand, on the water. I was worried somebody up front would see us. So I'd go to the back, but then I didn't want to not hear if somebody was coming in through the front to come get us, like cops or something. And so we had these big space blankets, like the silver space blankets that you use camping. We had those. And there was a condo nearby that was for sale, that was a model home. And he had broken in there and stolen some couch cushions and brought them to our beach mansion. And so we were sleeping on couch cushions with these space blankets. And I was out on bail for commercial burglary. And so I knew that if I got popped in that house, it's a residential burglary, which is a strike. And I remember laying there at night and he would be asleep in this crinkly, loud space blanket, staring at the ceiling. And tears would just be like rolling down my face. I was so scared. I was so terrified. It was like the most afraid I've ever been in my entire life. I was so afraid of kicking in jail and getting that residential burglary strike. At that time, that's what the conscious fears were. Since then, I think there were a lot of reasons for me to be afraid, right? My life was falling apart and I wasn't young. I was like 33. 32 living there. It was like I was 19, I was old, laying in this abandoned house, dying of hep C, sharing needles with anybody that came through, staring at the ceiling. And that day is the day that popped into my mind when you said, was there a day? Just like those moments. And actually, there was a night in particular, we were laying there and the place lit up with blue and red lights. The cops were there. They'd pulled into that driveway. And I jumped up, ran all the way through the house, through the back, out the sliding glass door, onto the sand, like busted ass on the sand, and just started tearing off down the beachfront in Oceanside, running, assuming the cops are behind me. And eventually I got to this spot where there was like this like bluff of sand kind of. And I went left to this bluff, buried myself in the sand up to my chin, and I could see cops on ATVs coming down the beach. And I had glasses with one lens in them. And so I'm literally like this, laying in the sand, covered up to my neck. And I kept thinking that I saw ATVs. And then sometimes I'd think, no, are those buoy lights or are those ATVs? I can't tell because it was dark, right? And I'm laying there for hours. I can feel little creatures like skittering over my feet in the sand and stuff. And the sun starts to come up. And I realize it's buoys. It is not cops on ATVs. And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking they probably got my ex because he was still in the house. I don't know. So I get up. I'm literally covered in sand. This is a nice area of Oceanside. And as I'm walking up, I hear my ex and I had this whistle from the Three Amigos. I don't know if I can do it because I have Botox in my lips. Hold on. I probably can't do it. It's like, I can't do it because of my Botox. If I can do it, that means I need a new appointment. So it's actually good that I can't do it. But it's just like Three Amigos whistle, right? And I hear the whistle and baby. And I'm like, holy shit, it's him. And I go out to the front and there's my ex on a stolen like tricycle with streamers. And I came out and I was like, oh my God, they didn't get you? And he said, who? I said, the cops, man. And he said, Jeannine, nothing fucking happened. You just jumped up and ran out of the house. Nothing happened. The cops were never there. It was all me just tweaking out. And so I had buried myself on the beach in sand for hours and nothing had even happened. Isn't that insane? For hours. What is crazy is if they ever would have sent ATVs down the beach looking for a tweaker junkie girl. That wouldn't have happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
So anyways, that question, when you said, what is one day that would really define your using, that's the day that popped into my brain. And then the other one, because I said that there was two. The other one was my last arrest was for strong arm robbery. And I was sitting in holding. And the first time I got arrested was for a DUI. And my bail was $2,000. My first arrest, it was a minor DUI, 0.09, 0.08, something like that. And so $2,000 bail means $200 to get out. My stepdad did it for me. I'm waiting for him. And this girl came in kind of later in the night, like 3 a.m. She walked in and the bailiffs knew her. And she knocked on the window right away and said, just dress me out. Which at that time, I didn't know what that meant, but that means I'm not even going to try to bail out. Just take me to regular jail, right? Because they let you sit in holding for a while attempting to bail out before you actually have to go to regular jail. And she said, just dress me out. And I think I must have asked her, she's not even going to try to get bail. And her bail was $100,000. And I was like, holy shit. That's everything I'm just bailing out or, dressing out right away, $100,000. The bailiffs know you. I just couldn't even imagine, right? This is before I was on heroin. I was just drinking and doing coke. I couldn't even imagine. My last arrest, 3 years later, so that would have been in 2010. In 2013, I get arrested for strong arm robbery. go into holding, same holding cell. I pick up the phone to call. I had this bail guy that I use all the time. His name was Tom at Wizard Bail Bonds. He like knew my mom pretty well by the end. And I pick up the phone, and before they go into holding, they give you your charge. And the lady had said, it's still a 211 for the code, right? To the bailiff. And I said, a 211? Because I know what that is. That's armed robbery. And the cop said, you wanted to be cute and not talk to me. So I have to go with what the security guard said. You wanted to be cute, not say anything. So yeah, it's 211. It's strong armed robbery. And I looked at the bailiff and I said, what's the bail on that? And she said 100,000. I said, 100,000 bucks? She said, yeah. And I was like, okay, wow. And I looked at the cop. It was a woman, Carlsbad PD. And I just looked at her and I said, oh, okay, okay. And she was like, okay, like kind of mocking me. And I went into holding and I walked over to the payphone and I picked it up to start to call Tom. But that's $10,000 to get out, right? And I put the phone down. And I'm like, no one's going to give me 10 grand to get out of here. And I knocked on the window and I said, all right, just dress me out. And they pulled me out to give me sweats to take me down to Las Colinas. And I'm freezing cold, laying on the ground, waiting for them to take me on the bus. And I remembered that girl from 3 years prior, dressed me out, bails $100,000. I was like, holy shit. I became that person. I remember sitting there all dressed up because a lot had changed from that DUI from a sushi place in La Jolla to now I'm strung out homeless, just like that girl. Isn't that crazy?
Not all of us get such a metaphor delivered right
Yeah,
perfectly like that, my goodness.
I know. Is that weird?
It's some things I feel like are just fated in some
Yes.
ways for our recovery. And I'm glad you pulled out like 2 days from the original question because it usually is these kind of like memories that are burned into our brains. And most times there's a turning. Would you say both of those moments in conjunction pushed you towards recovery? Are you remembering them so vividly because also they were turning points?
No. Sadly, no. Sadly, no. I don't even stop using for 2 years after that $100,000 bill. Nope, they weren't. So, the running away, I mean, I remember it because I was really aware the whole time of how bad this was. Like, I went to college, sort of. I went to George Washington University for a semester, and then the University of Georgia. I took AP classes, blah, blah, blah. I'd had this whole ass life prior to heroin. And even prior to kind of the cocaine years, and even during the cocaine years, like I went to Paris with a boyfriend. Like I kind of lived a life, which I also think benefited me later, that I had had some life that I knew was available to me. And when I
Mhm.
meet people that start using at 14, 15, 16, and it was just even in the house, that's how they grew up because their parents were using. That to me, honestly, is even so much more admirable because I'm like, man, how did you know that there was a different life available to you? I knew my dad's a pilot. My mom's a social worker. They have master's degrees. I knew that there was a different life. And I remember those moments because they were in such jarring contrast with the life I'd had, the life I thought I would have. And so I remember them because I felt like such a loser. But no, they weren't even turning points. I mean, I guess I will say both of those times preceded me getting into treatment within a month or two, actually. That arrest for robbery, when I got out, I was homeless by myself for a while because my ex and I got arrested at the same time, right, on this robbery. And I was homeless by myself for the first time without him. And then when he got out, I begged my mom to take me to detox, and she did. So I did go to treatment after that, but it's not my last sobriety date. I use again and again and again and again for another few years. My sobriety date is in 2015. I think they're burned in my brain because they were so insane, and I did know that, and I was aware. But yeah, they weren't even turning points. They weren't even turning points. I mean, that's I have 20 stories like that. Just absolute insanity. But now I'm forgetting what your original question was. Was your original question, is that why I remember them so well? Because they were turning points? And the answer is
Well,
no.
I wondered, but then you also said, both of those moments are connected to at least first shots
Yes.
at treatment, right? And that is
Yep.
when we always gather a little something, even though
You're
we
right.
try 10 different times. I feel like, and I did too, I feel like I learned a little bit something along the way. And
Absolutely.
so, you
Absolutely.
know, they are also super crazy. So you're going to remember them because
Right.
they were probably followed by that moment of, I might have to get control of this. I
Yes.
just,
Yes.
as wipe the sand out of crevices you didn't know you had, like, I might need to
Yeah.
reconsider my life
Yes.
choices.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned that, one of the most important things that you do now in your recovery is give back, is doing things like this. And of course, I'd love to talk about Chasing Heroine, and it's going on now for, is that 6 years?
6 years. The first episode released, I think, in, like, September of 2020, but I owned my studio then. We sold it in 2022. I still manage one and teach out one, but we sold hours in 2022. And when I started it, it was full height of COVID out here, and so we were all online. I had time to do it. When we reopened, I did not have time to do the podcast as often as I wanted to, so I would take season breaks. So, yes, it's been 6 years, but I don't have 6 years of episodes. I would take 3-month breaks, come back, be back for 7 months, take some breaks. Now I haven't taken a break in a bit. It's probably been a year and a half or so. But yes, so I started in 2020. So I've had it for about 6 years.
Yeah. Well, my question about, all the folks that you've interviewed on your show, which I think is coming up to 300
Mhm.
episodes, is there kind of like a common denominator, a through line through these stories of the people that you have brought to your show that maybe someone who's not in recovery wouldn't maybe plainly see?
Yes, 2 things, because I love that question
Mhm.
too. I'm telling you, Max, these are really good questions. Like, I'm gonna use
Thank
these.
you.
They're so good. They're very
Thank
thoughtful.
you.
2 things. 1, you can really be bad off and get it all together. And when I reference, "Oh, this privilege I had and stuff," even I thought, "There's there might be a line where it's too far." But I have learned through my interviews that that's not true. Dude, I interviewed this guy a few weeks ago. His name's Lewis. He has a podcast called Fuck Fentanyl. And this guy, he was involved in gangs in Chula Vista and 4 felony arrests. And when he finally got clean again, he went to, a county funded program like me. But unlike me, he's a Mexican man in Chula Vista. Everyone's running his background and he's got 4 felonies. It's a different way to show up. Zero support from family, $0, which I also had $0. But, again, there's a difference, there's a difference in privilege. There's just an inherent difference, which I acknowledge.
Mhm.
And he had a really hard time even he finally got a job as a dishwasher after months of looking. And he was at a place called the Freedom Ranch, which will pay for you to go to sober living for a few months. So he's living on $0 in food stamps. Thank God in the Obama era, we got phones. So he did have a phone. I had my Obama phone too, thank God. And he gets a job as a dishwasher. And then eventually he became a line cook. And then he moved up and he moved up and he moved up and he moved up. He's taken the bus for 3 years. And now he has 13 years. And he had a 5-year prison term hanging over his head, which he never had to go serve. And after I think 3 years, he went and saw the judge for something. And he said, "Hey, man, I'm really struggling with this back pay on stuff. Is there any way we could work on this?" Because he owed a ton in fines. He also owed $50,000 in fines, something insane. And the
Jesus.
judge, yeah, something insane. And the judge said, "You know what? All you have to do is pay for the public defender, really. It's $1,000. That's all you have left. I'm wiping everything else." Because it's just like civil fines and stuff, right? But, penalties, punitive stuff. And so they wipe it all. They expunged his record and he got a car. He bought his first car for $600. And now, as I'm talking to him, he lives in a place, he's got like a nice little apartment in Chula Vista. He lives there alone. He has started his podcast as well. He works at the Freedom Ranch again. He's younger than me. So he's, 35 or 36 with all this stuff. I mean, he completely rebuilt his life. And that's the exact situation I'm talking about. We're not a lot of privilege. A lot of stuff is going against you. And he completely rebuilt his life with nothing. And I've interviewed a lot of people like that. And that I think it has surprised me and heartened me. You can be pretty bad off with no help and rebuild. You can. It's possible. That, and then also, I think people would be surprised to know that so many heroin addicts or opiate addicts didn't know you would get strung out, which is silly, but, like, that has been a pattern. A lot of people didn't know. Like, of course, heroin is addictive, but, DARE told us they were all addictive. Cocaine is
Mhm.
addictive. Heroin's addictive, of course. But a lot of people are surprised the first day they get dope sick. They're like, "Holy shit, what's happening?" And we all remember that moment where someone was like, "You're dope sick. I told you this would happen." And we're like, "What?" That to me is also a through line that I think most people would be surprised to hear. We had no idea.
And it's like now been in the recovery world for almost 10 years. I can't even bring myself out to like when I knew what being dope sick was.
Or you just don't know that if you don't do it every day, you're going to get sick, right? So, like,
Yeah.
for me, there's also a lot of denial that goes into this and in my situation. So that guy that I mentioned, because I didn't start with medication or pills or anything. I was right to heroin, but he did. He started with oxys before I met him. And then I think he'd gotten off of them. I don't really know, but bottom line, eventually he's strung out on heroin. I catch him and I eventually try it. And again, there's like a lot of stories here, but I eventually try it. And it kind of reminded me of cocaine because I had my energy back. And I
Mm.
was like, I was teaching bar at that time, bar, which is a very bougie style of fitness, it's Pilates. I'm teaching bar and smoking heroin. And I'm up, like coming up with like bar routines, but I could sleep. It was like cocaine, but I could sleep. So I'm doing it with him every day for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a long enough time. And they would all talk about him and his buddies that all worked together. They were all strung out. They would talk about getting dope sick. And he had friends that would tell me, you're going to get strung out. I would hear those words and be like, no, I won't. I used to be a cocaine addict and I quit doing cocaine a long time ago. Like I'm good. Cause I also believed I wasn't a cocaine addict anymore, even though I had to move from LA to San Diego to stop doing it. But I was like, no, I kicked this cocaine habit. I won't get strung out. I'm not like you guys. I'm not like you
Mhm.
guys. That won't happen. And there was one day I wasn't going to go out to his house and see him. And I was supposed to take a Pilates class. Again, there was like this weird dichotomy between this bougie life that I thought that I had and then my actual addiction, which was
Mhm.
another thing that I had to reconcile with later was that it was not an accident that I got strung out on heroin. Like my girlfriends that I went to high school with, if they were dating a guy and they found out that he was doing heroin, they would break up with him. They would never go
Yeah.
back. I didn't do that. And later I really had to get clear about that. Like not only did I not do that, I tried it. You're already on the other side of some line when you do that, because my other girlfriends who did go to law school and blah blah blah, they that never would have happened to them. Regular people don't accidentally get strung out on heroin. So
Right.
I was going to go out to his house and I didn't. And I started to feel sick. And we had a mutual friend who lived closer to me and he called me and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I was going to go to this class, but I don't know. I think I'm getting the flu. And he said, Jeannine, you're dope sick. And I said, I'm not. And he said, all right, well, why don't you come over here and smoke with me and see if you feel better? And I said, okay. So like I drove over to his house and I remember I brought my own straw and he handed me a straw. And I said, oh, I brought my own. I don't want to get you sick because I thought I had the flu. And I
Right.
remember his face. He looked sad. It's my friend Brian. And he said, okay. And I remember how I was standing. We are standing at the edge of his bed. I had my knee up on the footboard with one leg standing, right? Like I was kind of leaning on it. I remember where I was standing. He was standing facing me. And I did I smoked heroin. I forget what we even call it, a slide, whatever it is, a row, ripped like a row of heroin and immediately felt better. And I looked at him and he was just staring at me. And I said, oh my God, did I just accidentally get strung out on heroin? And he said, Jeannine, we told you. And I said, no, you did not. You did not tell me. You did not. No, I did not understand this. So what do I do now? And he said, I mean, you could kick. And I said, well, how long does that take? And he said, 2 weeks. I have to go to work tomorrow. I can't take off 2 weeks from work. So, and he said, you could buy more. The other option is buying more. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to do that, you know? And then I met actually the person, I meet my first heroin connect, who is the person later that says to me years later, I'm in a motel room saying, what can I do? I have to fake this blood test. I was trying to forge a blood test because, just the machinations of years have passed. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And he said, you could get clean. So this is my first heroin addict, my first heroin dealer years later. Now he's gone to prison, been busted, got out, is clean, is trying to help me. So actually, this is when I meet him. And I said, well, okay, what's his name? And Brian said, this guy, Brooke. And I was like, is he scary? Does he have a gun? I was so out of my element. And Brian was like, no, he's not scary, man. I'll take you over there. And I said, how much does it cost? I didn't even know. and so I started buying $20 worth of heroin every day, starting at that moment. But that was my moment. And it's very similar how many opiate addicts, there's a moment where you're sick and you're like, man, what the fuck is wrong with me? And someone in your life says, you're dope sick. That's the story. Yeah. So most people I have found don't know. Or like me, you hear about it, but you can't possibly know what it means until you're in it.
Yeah, no, I'm reflecting now, and it wasn't until, like, my first stint in a rehab that I probably knew what dope sick was.
Sure.
You're absolutely right. Before that, I probably thought, "Oh, you probably feel shitty the next day like one
Yes.
does with alcohol," but that's
Yes.
it.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought too. Or cocaine would make me really sick the next day. I assumed it was like
Mhm.
that. If I thought about it at all, what they were saying, that's what I would have thought.
It's so interesting to kind of be able to note also the physical addiction aspect in that moment. It's a different scale, but it reminds me of it's all about losing our own personal boundaries with the substance, right? I think about the moment the next day when I made that first decision to go, if I drink in the morning,
Right.
I can push off this hangover
Yes.
and I can get these shakes to stop and I
Yeah.
can feel better. It's that
Yeah.
moment like I started losing the
Mhm.
control, losing the boundaries. And it's similar in
Yes.
that way. Like, oh, now I am dependent and to be
Mhm.
so conscious of it.
But it's real slow, right? Like, it's just drinking in the morning. It's not, I'm not going to work. I'm at a bus stop with a brown bag.
Mhm.
One of my favorite definitions of rock bottom I ever heard is rock bottom happens when your circumstances degrade faster than you can lower your standards to meet them. That's when a rock bottom finally happens because there are these little degrades, these little descents of circumstances. $20. I go to this guy's house. He lives in Carlsbad. It's this guy broke. He's really nice. Okay. $20. Okay. Here's my standards. And then eventually it's, oh, you got to bring some to your brother's wedding. Okay. Just a little bit. $40. There's your circums. And then it's like, well, your roommate or, your boss is telling you you smell like cigarettes at the bar studio, you know. Okay. So it's like these slowly degradations of circumstances, but you can lower your standards to meet them. And then thank God there's a moment when it's like, nope, the circumstances just got too low. Now I'm living in a doghouse. The circumstances are too low. But often
Mhm.
that's an emotional thing, I think. Like it's not, and that's actually probably another through line of everyone. Those two moments weren't even necessarily my rock bottom. And in fact, the last few days of my using, I know you've probably heard me talk about this. I was in a doghouse, right, in this guy's
Mhm.
backyard. That wasn't even the most afraid I've ever been by far. That guy was my friend. I felt very safe with that dude. Yeah, actually. And that wasn't even the worst situation I'd ever been in by far. But it
Mhm.
was the end. And there was some sort of emotional slide there, obviously. And that is another thing I've noticed because you'll hear some bad story and you're like, well, that's it, right? That's when you stop. No, I
No,
go another 2 years. I stop on a Monday because I just decide it's too much. But
Mhm.
obviously something internal happened,
Absolutely.
living in a doghouse, seeing living in a doghouse at 35 years old as the best thing that ever happened to you is not explicable by any law of human nature that I would think that's the best thing that ever happened to me. Yet I do. That is an actual miracle.
Cool. That's so brilliant.
It's cool,
I
right?
love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's cool.
All right. So looking back at
Yeah.
it all, I know we talked about kind of all over the place today, which I found really, really lovely. Um, and I often ask myself this question: is there something that you think addiction was trying to solve for you?
So, yeah, I think that in the beginning, the immediate need was I was in incredible grief after my dad left, just a really deep depression. However, prior to that, I remember in elementary school, middle school, high school, and I think I thought everyone felt this way. And I think to some extent, most teenagers do. But I think with addicts, it's a bit deeper. I always just desperately wanted to be different. I wanted to be not who I was. I wanted to look different. I wanted to have different friends. I always wanted to be cooler. I always wanted to be popular. I wanted to be prettier. I wanted to be all these things. And I was just never okay with who I was ever, even back then. And so the depression and the grief after my dad left knocked me into it, but it was already there. And so that for me, I think, I believe addiction is chemical. I think I was born with, whatever it is when your brain needs more of something to feel the same. Like they've done that study where they show a baby of two addicts and a baby of not addicts, like their brain scan. And if you give one of them, I don't remember what it was, something a baby would like. If you give them the same amount, the baby of the addicts, their brain only lights up, like their dopamine receptors only lights up like this much. But the other baby, it lights up a lot. And this baby needs more and more and more and more and more to get to the same level. I'm surprised that study isn't referenced more often. But to me, there it is. I was always like that. I just think it's in my brain. And I'm actually incredibly grateful for it, like we were talking about. I'm so glad I had to go on this journey, this weird journey where it opened up my life in this completely different way. I wouldn't change a
Mhm.
thing. I wouldn't change one thing.
All right, the final
Yes.
question for you, Janine, and I'm positive you've got something good here. And that is and you've got plenty to say, and if you wanna actually hear more of your thoughts on this, listen to Chasing Heroine podcast. But if someone is in your spot that you were 10, 15 years ago, you know, hopeless, feeling ashamed, and convinced that they're beyond help, because I know that is a big one, right? Like, I'm worse off than everyone else. Nothing's gonna help me. What would you want them to know?
So the best part of the program to me, any program, by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean 12 step, which is what I did, but any program, you don't actually have to believe anything to start the work. You don't have to think that it's going to work because I didn't. I didn't. It was working for everyone else. I could see that. Like when you do talk to 12 step people, they'll go to meetings and they'll say, like, when I first got here, I thought you guys were all lying. You're taking your 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I thought they're full of shit. I didn't think anybody was lying. I believed that it was working, but I thought it wouldn't work for me. But you don't have to believe anything is going to be different to go to a meeting. I'll keep it, my experience. Ask for a sponsor and start doing what they say. You don't have to believe anything. You don't have to believe me. You can believe it's hopeless and just see what happens. I mean, I think that hopefully the stories shared by people like me and the people on my podcast and all that stuff can give you inspiration. But again, even if you think that could never possibly work for you, that's okay. You don't have to believe anything. But if you want something to be different, you can at least, just go to a meeting and start. Zero belief, but you can still start is what I would say. Just start and see what happens.
Because like we've talked about, like, maybe it's not the last time you use, but it is part of the scaffolding that is gonna kind of bring you back, right? Like,
Yes.
I really
Yes.
do think every attempt
Yeah.
has meaning behind it. Every attempt, you learn something. Um
Absolutely. That's another thing. I consider myself I was a chronic relapser, right? And I don't like that word. It's programmy talk, but I was definitely
Mhm.
considered a chronic relapser. And when I was doing an episode with my podcast co-host, the social worker who's a normie, when I had 5 years, she was asking me like, well, how the fuck, you're in a doghouse and now you own the studio we sit in. What did that first look like when you first come back what did you do? How did you even do this? And I said, well, when I was out at my friend's house where I kicked, I was calling Steve all the time. And she said, oh, you already knew Steve. And I said, yeah, I knew Steve from when I was in the sober living before. And, Brooke was trying to help me get in, that drug dealer I told you about. And she said, okay, so you knew Brooke? And I said, yeah. And I said, and I was talking to Rachel. And she said, oh, you knew Rachel too? And I said, yeah. And I realized at that time, when I was talking to her at 5 years, that I already knew all those people. That's how I was successful that last time. And so every time I came in and tried wasn't a failure. Every time we come in, we're gathering tools and we're gathering resources, and those are available to us when we're ready to execute on that information. They're not failures, but I didn't see it that way until 5 years in when she asked me all that. So yes, also that, like I'd never even heard of Suboxone when I went to my first detox. But if
Mhm.
you are someone that's been in and out, you probably already have a big book laying around the house. There's probably someone that you could call right now and be like, "Hey, I'm back. Can you sponsor me?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, okay." I already had a lot of information based on those previous attempts, and I didn't believe that it would work. But I just thought, well, I was tired of living outside and, I guess I'll do this. I'll try again. But you don't have to have any belief. There's a lot of inspiration everywhere. You can see a lot of inspiration and still think, oh, well, it's not going to work for me. And I guess my
Mhm.
point is that's okay. You don't have to believe any of it. You can hear my story. You can hear my friend Lewis's story that I just told you about. You don't have to believe that any of that is possible to you for you to actually just start even just taking the action. Just take action. and see.
I like that though, because there's a lot of way to scare people into treatment.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I like your approach though, because it says, just give it a try.
It doesn't have to be pass fail. Maybe it's realistic too, hopefully.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't have to believe any of my flowery language or promises,
Hmm.
you know? You don't
Yeah.
have to
You
believe
might
shit to start. You don't have to
you might
believe.
try something and
Yeah.
fucking hate it.
Yes.
And
That
that's learning about yourself.
right, that too. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
this might not work right now. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. It's all just an adventure. It's all an investment in yourself. And
Yeah. Mhm.
I love it. Janine,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Max.
What I love about Janine's story is that her recovery didn't begin with some perfect moment of clarity. There were attempts, there were relapses, there were people she met along the way, lessons she didn't even realize she was collecting until years later, all the mess, all the beauty. And I really love where we landed too. You don't have to believe that recovery is going to work for you before you start. You don't even have to feel hopeful or ready or convinced. You can just take the next action, literally, and see what happens next. Huge thank you to Jeannine Coulter for sharing her story with us. You can hear more from her on the Chasing Heroine podcast, wherever you find podcasts. And you can find her recovery content on social media at Jeannine Coulter. Check out the show notes for the correct spelling. And while you're at it, if you like this podcast, go ahead and click subscribe or follow. And I am Max, and this is the Work at Health podcast. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.